over email and through social media. We get advice, critiques, and technique input from people we've never met in person, but are a part of our community. We may go to sewing day with others, and their voices and creativity influence ours. We can look at an infinite number of images to get inspiration. Like no other time in history, we can see and find community in both digital and physical spaces. This may resonate with some other creative works, but feel foreign to some others. But this part is messy part of quilting, I mentioned above, and why quilting is invariably complex in the creative world. Now, this book was written in 2020, in 2019 to 2020, before the pandemic. I finished it just as a pandemic was happening. And so we know that online quilting communities and all kinds of technology has really impacted on who we are and how we work. So we're going to continue, but that's something really interesting to think about, is how much, just in this time of writing this book, how much things have shifted out of necessity. Okay, next part, quilting online communities. Community continues to be a huge part of quilting, whether that is neighborhood getting-togethers, guilds, churches, quilt retreats, even quilt cruises, social media, and even old-fashioned snail mail, where all kinds of blocks and challenges are exchanged. And these communities are often making charity quilts or collaborative quilts in one way or another. They are teaching, learning, and sharing. This is part of who we are and a big part of the quilting story and ecosystem. But we also see entrepreneurial communities and, of course, the growth of online communities. When I started this project, I joined quilting groups on Facebook, and of course, we started the Just Wanna Quilt Facebook group. Here are a few examples of the groups I joined and the number of members at the time of publishing in January 2020. Quilting on the Budget, 34,000 members. Quilting Pattern Designers, 700 members. Quilting with David, 1,300 members. Quilters Creative Touch, 1,500. Quinique, 2,000. Threads of Success, 98 members. Simply Handmade Everyday, 671 members. Quilted Twins, 10,000 members. Quilt History South, 777 members. Beecher Memorial UCC Quilt Group, 120 members. Quista Quilts, 5,000 members. Free Motion Quilting Challenge, 31,000 members. Gypsy Wife Quilt Group, 3,400 members. Quilting Tula Pink, 4,500 members. Machine Applique Adventures, 1,100. Wesley by Me, 9,400. Handpiece Quilting, 1,600. Muppin, 4,000. Bernina Lovers, 18,000. Quilt Alliance, 7,000. Of course, this is just an aside. It's curious to see how much those groups grew or shrunk during the pandemic. But that was what it was in 2020. Seth Heckler runs Quilting on a Budget, a Facebook group phenomenon of over 30,000 members. We've gotten to know him over the last 2 years. He has a way of drawing people in and making them feel comfortable. He is starting to branch out and think about the next steps with this group. The Stitch TV, a weekly show, with an accompanying Facebook group run by Pam Cobb and Lynn Reinhardt, where they talk about quilting things, has also gathered. Then they also have a pattern line. Quilters Creative Touch is a group devoted to discussing the automation software that is put out by Grace Company, a place where members help each other with various questions and share successes. Quilted Twins is a combination of Becky in Poland, who makes charity quilts and patterns, and that are spectacular, and her sister Rachel, who has a discount fabric shop in Florida. Each group, in short, has its own quirkiness and focus. The big ones: Missouri Star Quilting Company in 2020, 110,000 followers. Quiltville by Bonnie Hunter with 122,000 followers. Quilt As You Go, 99,000. Scrap Quilt Enthusiasts, 67,000. Quilting Space, 77,000, and Quilt Along with Pat Sloan, 58,000. Just Wanna Quilt's Facebook group has been an enormous part of this project. At the time of writing, we are 2,800 strong. We're now at like 41 or 4,200. We also have 3 subgroups: the JWQ Gypsy Wife Sew Along, JWQ Inventory Quilt, and my personal favorite, the JWQ Stealth Sewing Squad, where we work on projects needed for the Just Wanna Quilt project. Since the writing of this, we've also created our copyright group as well. These groups are bringing people together in interesting ways to work on projects that help us to explore copyright. Platforms like Facebook and Instagram provide connectivity and spaces to find support, kindness, learning, and problem solving. Many of us are lone quilters, but not alone. This project is dramatically richer because of these connections. Quilters go to these groups for friends. We share what we've been working on. We learn to fix problems. We find groups specific to our sewing machine brand that we might be thinking of purchasing. We troubleshoot problems with software in the group. The Facebook group is a central component of the quilting world, at least in 2020. This is true for so many creatives. There exists a myriad of general and narrow cyber groups in our space that we can join for support and inspiration. The thing about online groups, from my experience, is that they turn into real friendships, where you chat on the phone, meet in person at various events, and share both quilty things, but also the joys of new babies and the sadness of life. These relationships and groups are powerful and important, and so far underestimated by the quilting industry. Types of quilters. You are creating a quilt. From inspiration, from a variety of sources, it's yours. You might be making it for a wedding or for a birth or selling the pattern professionally. The context of the resources you use and what you plan to do with it matters in terms of copyright. That's what this book is all about. And in many ways, we are rarely in just one of those categories, but they help us to start understand the relationship between the creative process and copyright. So let's take a look. The quilter. The techniques vary: piecing, foundation piecing, English paper piecing, applique, improv, to name a few. But the focus on creating works from fabric that are generally meant to be used, not just admired, is constant. We experiment, we try new styles, we have favorite color palettes, we try to master the 1/4 inch seam. Some of us care if our points match. We, the quilting army, quilt. Over the last 2 years, I've tried many techniques as possible, meaning I have about 35 finished quilts, which has increased. This is an aside. I don't really know how many quilts we have. Some number, at one point we thought we had 125 quilts. Most of those, about half of those I made and half were quilts that came in. I know we've made more than 35 because I've given away a lot of quilts. So I have no idea at this point how many quilts I personally have made, but there's been a lot of making. Back to the book. Okay. But I think that there are so many possibilities. Okay, sorry, let's start again. Meaning I made about 35 finished quilts and unaccountable started abandoned projects. But I think there are so many possibilities as part of what makes quilts so alluring, addictive, and awesome. My favorite, surprisingly, at the time of writing, I loved machine applique. I'm kind of shocked by that because now I don't like it at all, which is super duper weird. I often now like big, blotchy, long, huge strips of fabric and putting them together really quickly, but then really spending time on the quilting aspect of it. So that's funny that machine applique was what I liked when we were writing this book 3 years ago. It's totally weird. Okay, the artist. Quilters are artists. And we have some spectacular famous ones. Sean Kimber, Jackie Gehring, Amy Messenger, Claudine Feifel, and Sue Bleiweiss come to mind. Tula Pink. Wendy Starn, part of our quilting army, is making 3 pieces at a time of writing for a show on poverty and homelessness. And she previously finished a piece called Too Raw about gun violence. On that point, her work during COVID is spectacular. Her work is really amazing. Wendy's work blows me away every time I see it. Wendy explains, I have to make these pieces. My art is my voice. Multi-award-winning quilter Claudia Feil describes having to get a quilt out of her creative mind and make it. For some, quilting is just part of one of the many media. As we learned from Victoria Finley Wolfe, a trained artist who came to quilting after being a sculptor and a painter. You do not have to be famous or trained artist to create art quilts. Art quilting is a huge part of the quilt landscape. I've had the pleasure of talking to so many art quilters over the last few years, and they just blow me away. As an aside, I also went to the Bisa Butler show. I have a piece, maybe we'll read that about that show. And she is, her work is huge and stunning and amazing. And in that piece, I talk about how the crowds and waiting for it was amazing to see an African-American quilt artist as the center show at the Art Institute of Chicago was a moment of wonder and amazement and beauty. Her stuff is just, there is nothing like it. It is amazing. Okay, back to the book. The Puzzler. We find a pattern or kit, instructions, often sometimes fabric, and we make it just the way the quilt designer suggested. Or not. We might alter the colors dramatically. Maybe we substitute a bear for a duck. But when we're finished, it looks like the original. The pattern maker has given the quilter a non-exclusive right to make that quilt. No new copyright has been created. Yours is yours. But you don't get to have the legal right to do anything but make it. You can, of course, with your sewing talents, give it away, donate it to an auction, or keep it. Some pattern makers are okay with you selling it, but best practices tells us to ask the pattern maker if the pattern does not explicitly say that you can sell the items from the pattern. Others feel like you've made it so that you can sell it. The law, of course, we will soon see, is not clear. The professional. We have had a lot of discussions within our community of what makes someone a professional. Usually it was the focus on earning a living from quilting rather than strictly a level of skill or dedication to the craft of quilting itself. We see professionals in the quilting industry come from every background. Krista Watson explains, I fell in love with quilting when I was studying business in college and knew right away that I wanted it to be my business someday as well as my hobby. That way, I'd have an excuse to quilt whenever I wanted, LOL, unquote. Some people make their living from quilting like Cheryl Sloboda. Others are trying to transition from their day job to full-time quilting. Some are retired but now focus on their entrepreneurial careers. Some maintain a day job and quilt professionally, nights and weekends for the extra income and the creative release. Then there are many ways to be professional and to be part of the quilting industry. In many ways, this book is for the professional, someone seeking to commercialize whatever it is they want to do within the quilting craft world. It's when things start to become professional that copyright sits up and takes notice. I'd also have to say it also is for the hobbyist to make sure that you feel comfortable and know that there's a lot of things you can do, and also how to respect professionals and where those lines and cultural boundaries are. But we see that the industry depends on part-time creatives submitting their patterns to magazines, designing their fabric lines, teaching a class here and there, and writing books. The industry is filled with mostly women all over the country doing their part, earning a small bit of money, but being part of a larger world. In many ways, quilting is a cottage industry, and it is not just the companies farming out various tasks to quilters. Think of the long armers. A long arm is a quilting machine that glides over a carriage so you can quilt much faster than by a home machine. Some are freehand, some do it by computer, some do both. But think of the long armer who buys this expensive machine and then takes in quilts starting at 15 cents per inch. Starting at 0.015 per inch. 1 cent, 2 cents per inch. The activist. This is the subject of the art quilter. We talked to Sue Bleiweiss about the political outpouring during the Trump presidency in the U.S., 2017, and the exhibit Threads of Resistance. We discussed community projects on immigration with Janie Zyman and Andrea Sang Jackson. The quilt as an art form is powerful, dramatic, and beautiful. We also talked to Derek Reed about her powerful piece made for the